Hello and welcome to another Harrogate podcast with me, Andrew Gray. In the Harrogate podcast, it's my job to interview and deconstruct the movers and shakers in Harrogate. Today I'm delighted to have with me author Malcolm Hollingdrake. Malcolm is a prolific author with many of his books being set here in Harrogate. He's best known in particular for the DCI Cyril Bennett series. In fact, just as we were beginning this podcast, Malcolm was explaining to me that in one of his books, The Third Breath, 2 people were murdered outside my office here on Victoria Avenue, Harrogate, which really did make me chuckle. Malcolm, welcome, how are you?
Good morning, thank you very much for having me. I'm very well indeed, thank you.
Good, thank you. I don't particularly like macabre thoughts, but you have placed one in the forefront of my mind. Tell me, how did these people die outside my office in Victoria Avenue?
In very strange circumstances.
Ooh.
It was a strange book, but a friend of mine who's been in a certain industry for a considerable length of time, in fact all his working career, decided that he knew the perfect way to commit murder. So I got the phone call. Now, you might think that this is strange, but I do get phone calls like this quite frequently. So I thought, okay, well, I've heard these before, but I will give him some time. And I went down and I sat with him, and it was going to be a half-hour chat. It turned into an hour and a half. And when I came home, I started to research what he was telling me, and the scientifics worked correctly, and I decided it had to be the case. And so I murdered 2 people using this process. I can't tell you the process, because if I told you the process, it would spoil the book for the reader.
Well, we don't want any spoilers.
But it leaves no mark on the body whatsoever, and it makes it look as though it's natural causes.
Were these people who died, were they Russians?
No, they weren't Russians, and it was nothing to do with a poison as such, because everything is a poison. If you take anything in quantity, it will kill you. Toothpaste, if you ate enough of it, would kill you. But it was a very interesting case, and it was one that caused a lot of upset with Cyril Bennett and his team. But killing them on Victoria Avenue was perfect, because it was ideal to leave them in the middle of the road where nobody walked, and they could have stayed there until the traffic warden found them, of course.
What a great way to start a podcast. I can say that of all the Harrogate podcasts, that is not how we have started one. Now, tell us a little about this DCI Cyril Bennett series. I believe there's 8 books. When did you first start writing them?
I started writing the books probably 3 years ago. The first one being Only the Dead, and I can tell you a little bit about that. That was a gentleman who collected sulphur mustard from the shells of World War I ammunition that he found on the side of roads in France, as you do. If you travel through France and Belgium, you will see shells left where the farmer has ploughed them up, and he'll put them, and then either the Belgian or the French armed forces will collect them and dispose of them. Well, he collected them, and he actually extracted the sulphur mustard, but he didn't want to kill people, he wanted to punish people. And so he would go around with a small vial of this after extracting it and deposit it on their head, and they would breathe it in, they would be harmed, some of them seriously harmed, but he chastised them. It was a chastisement process. I found that the research for that really fascinating. And I always thought that sulphur mustard was a gas trapped within the shell. Well, it was not. It's actually a gel. So when it explodes, it vaporizes and becomes the gas. So the gel remains static, and depending on the condition of the shell, and of course the German shells were by far better condition than the English shells. So
I can sense, and I'm sure my listeners can sense too, you really know your subject. And must be most of the pleasure of being an author is researching a topic that you probably didn't know much about to the nth degree, and then extracting the interesting bits and using it in your stories, which in the DCI Bennett series are all set in Harrogate. And why Harrogate further? Because Harrogate surely is this place where the crime rate's low, nothing particularly interesting and macabre happened. I mean, not in my recollection have 2 people been murdered on Victoria Avenue. Or is it your view that there's Harrogate maybe keeps these things under wraps somewhat?
Well, Harrogate was known as the happiest place in the UK to live. That's what I read. And when I read that, I thought, okay, I was looking for a place to set my novels, And I thought, well, a little bit of crime introduced there wouldn't go amiss. And now Harrogate is the 4th happiest place in the UK to live, so I'm actually winning, I think. I'm getting there. And also because of the Stray. The Stray is such a magnificent piece of a town centre that you can actually link it. It has a mystery at night. It has it's a beautiful place during the day. It has a vibrancy. It's wonderful to describe in all the various seasons. So you have an immediate palette of colour and backdrop and people on which to delve and to use within your writing. So the Stray, the happiest place, but then you look at some of the buildings, they're beautiful. And I have now people coming to Harrogate to find the Black Door, or to find the Rogers Arms houses, or to find, well, they always went to Betty's, but Montpellier Hill, and to find the gallery on Montpellier Hill, or to go into the Valley Gardens and look for the Magnesia Well, and all of those things that we bring out of the book.
And one of them is the Brunswick Tunnel, which you were telling me all about. And we're sitting here and just off on Victoria Avenue, not far from the Stray. And this Brunswick Tunnel, you've just told me, is on the Stray. Under. Now, tell us all, my listeners, about the Brunswick Tunnel and what happens to some of your characters, if you can, in the Brunswick Tunnel.
I can certainly do that. Hell's Gate was the title. The original title for that book, the working title for that book, was Just Above Hades. And you can imagine why. And I'd heard from somebody, by pure chance, that there was a tunnel beneath Harrogate Stray, and it was known as the New Brunswick Tunnel, and it was built at the end of the 19th century. And it lasted for 15 years only, but it cost a fortune to build. And it was designed and built to prevent the steam trains polluting the town centre. When it was closed off, the portals were sealed with metal grills, but the children of the town knew it as the Darkie. And so, of course, as kids would do, probably in the 40s and 50s, would dare each other to go inside the Darkie. In the Second World War, it was used for an air raid shelter, and at the far end, they built toilets and sleeping apartments, accommodation, some steps out, which are now lead out onto Aycliffe roundabout, I think, which is now sealed off. But occasionally they send people down. You can go down and they actually look at it and check it. The structure is fantastic. So I used that as a place called For the Chase, where we had Eastern European people traffickers who were bringing people to work within their restaurants and cafes within Harrogate. And should one try to leave, the penalty for that was they had to do the chase. So they would take the dogs down. Now I used a certain breed of dog, and they had to run the length of it, climb the wall, and if they were successful, they were given a second chance. If not, the dogs would catch them. And
what would happen when the dogs would catch them?
They were torn to pieces. Interestingly, the people were stripped, and around their head was stapled a head torch, so that the switch was broken off, so that it could always be seen in the dark wherever they were running. Some were successful, some were not.
This is the Harrogate podcast at its darkest. Thank you,
Yeah.
Malcolm.
Sorry about that.
No, don't apologise.
But I think it was a fascinating book to write, and I'm picking specific places that some people who live in Harrogate would not know existed suddenly come to light.
Indeed. Now, Malcolm, let's talk about your early days. Where were you born? Where did you study? So, because I know you became a teacher. Could you talk us through that period in your life?
I was born in a library.
Which library?
The Undercliff Road, Bradford. We think now of a library of a place where you go and you just take out a book, and at that time it was a penny library. Now, a penny library was my nan, who lived until she was 98. During the war, before libraries were prolific in Bradford, she had a penny library where people could go and borrow brand new books, but they paid a certain amount of money. So if the book was new, they maybe paid 4p. When they took it back, they got 3p back, and then they take out more books. But as the book became quite old, it went down to a penny, so it was known as the penny library. My parents were married, and we lived in that house where the penny library was. So I was born officially in the library, and then I moved to a place called West Street in Eccleshill. Went to Wellington Road School, the same school as David Hockney, the artist, not at the same time, I'm hasten to add. Then Carlton Grammar School, and then from Carlton I went to Ripon College of Education.
To study teaching, is that right?
Teacher Training College, yes. And that's what you wanted to do. Although up until the summer of that September, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And it was the interview at the college and looking at the college and going to Ripon really made my mind up for me. It was such a beautiful building.
And at college you met?
The first weekend I met a girl called Susan Deborah Clark, and we danced to a piece of music called Witch Queen of New Orleans. Now you're too young to know that one, Andrew.
I am.
And it has always been a favourite piece of music. And if I'm interviewed on radio now or anything and they say, well, you have to bring a record, well, that's the record I always take. We met that first weekend. Debbie became the president of the Students' Union whilst we were there. I left a year before she did. So she stayed on then to do B.Ed. And I got a job in Bingley, but it wasn't really where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in Richmond, and at that time when I was doing teaching practices, I did a teaching practice in Nunmoncton, which is the most beautiful village with its maypole and its pub called the Alice Hawthorne. I then did a teaching practice in Richmond on the second year, and I asked my tutors if I could go to Richmond again for the third year in the hope that I would have a job offered after the practice, because it was the longest practice you would have. But in the meantime, I applied for the pool at Bradford. At that time, there were a lot of teaching jobs, so you applied to a pool. You then could select where you wanted to be within that pool, depending on the age group you wanted to teach. And I was interviewed for a job at Gilstead Middle School in Bingley and was successful. However, when I finished my teaching practice, I was offered a job in Richmond as well. And I thought, well, do I turn down the Gilstead, do I let them down and go to Richmond, or do I stand by my guns and say no, principal is a principal, I will go to Gilstead? And I went to Gilstead. No regrets for doing that really, but I would have loved to have lived in Richmond. In fact, I still would. In fact, we are looking at the possibility of moving to Richmond too in our final years.
And so far you've only mentioned Yorkshire, many places in Yorkshire, but I know you've had a stint in my side of the Pennines, over in Lancashire.
I've been on missionary work in Lancashire since 1976, and we had a 4-year plan. When we got married in 76, my wife said, we'll do 4 years and then we'll go to Yorkshire. But it's taken longer than I thought, the work that I do. But it's funny, isn't it? I've spent now longer in Lancashire than I have in Yorkshire, but my heart is still here.
I can tell, very much so. I'm sure my listeners can as well. Now, not only have you taught on these two great counties, but you've taught abroad as well, which is quite a surprise. Just give us a flavour of where you've taught and doing what. Okay,
my wife taught in Corfu by pure accident. We went on holiday to Corfu in 81, and we both felt at home in Corfu town. So we decided that we realised there was a private school in Corfu. We decided that we would ask if jobs came up for the two of us to contact us. And the lady was called Marie Aspiotti, and said she would. We came home, and at that time I applied for a deputy headship and got it. I was 27, I think, at the time. And that same day when I came home after interview, there was a letter waiting for me that said there were 2 jobs available in Corfu town. So Deb and I chatted about it, and we decided that we would take one of the jobs in Corfu town, but I would stay in Wigan and fulfil my contract as a deputy head teacher. It would give me more time to spend as much of my professional time at school and give 100% to the job. And then in the holidays we would meet up in Corfu and have a good time. And it worked really, really well. And serendipity, as life often shows, Debbie met a chap who was working there as well, called Richard Gilby, who then moved out from Corfu when Debbie finished, and he finished to work in Cairo. And in 1984 he contacted us to say, would I go out to the new school they were building at the Pyramids on Saqqara Road to suggest how the school could be improved as a primary school and what resources might help. So on the Easter we travelled out for a fortnight. I gave them a resume of how I saw the school, how it could develop. I was then invited to apply for the job of senior teacher, and it was going to be a 1,000 pupil school. So I decided that I would ask my authority for a 2-year leave of absence, which they granted. And so we were then setting off on an adventure to live in a mud house out at the Pyramids on an estate which was owned by an architect called Ramesses Wisawasif. A beautiful name, isn't it?
Very Egyptian sort of name.
Very Egyptian, a lovely man. And they had a weaving school and a batik school there. And our houses were domed, outside staircase, they were beautiful. And it was within a short walk distance to the school. And we stayed there for not as long as we planned for 2 years, we stayed for 1 because of circumstances beyond our control. And so after the 12-month period we came home.
And so far none of your books have featured Egypt as a location. Why not?
Too far away, I think, for me. One of my books featured Northern Cyprus, where we travelled to next after Cairo, because it was a perfect setting. Not only was it then in the 80s very remote, but there was no extradition procedure between Britain and Northern Cyprus, so it was a haven for UK criminals at that time. As you may remember, Aslam Nadir made his famous escape and therefore couldn't come back, and there are a number of others who also did the same. So I thought that was a perfect plot that for one of the characters that he would go to Northern Cyprus, and I knew Northern Cyprus so well that it was perfect. And it's again, like Harrogate, the most beautiful country to describe. And if you're going to paint a picture of somewhere, let's make it pretty. Harrogate's beautiful, North Cyprus is beautiful, and in some ways Bradford is beautiful. So I set it in Bradford. That book, which was called Engulfed at the time, but is now called Bridging the Gulf, was set in Bradford and Northern Cyprus.
Thank you, Malcolm. Could you explain to my listeners your routine for writing a book, including, what time do you start in the morning, what time do you finish in the evening? Do you have to get a few glasses of wine to get your inspiration? Just talk to people who've never written a book. I want to understand you a bit more and where you get your inspiration and routine from. Just all of it, please.
I've been able to find out there are 2 different types of writers. There are pantsers and there are planners, and I'm a pantser. I just sit down and write. I don't plan it. I have an idea and I will just sit down and type away.
And where does the idea come from?
The idea can come from somebody ringing me and saying I've got a perfect idea for a murder, or I can read something in the paper, or somebody can say something to me. I was in a bed and breakfast in Harrogate when I wrote Treble Clef, before I wrote Treble Clef, and they were mentioning I was asking a question about the keys to the room. And everybody's done it.
Innocuous.
Everybody's done it. I think everybody's been to a hotel and then halfway up the road they found the key in their pocket and they've signed out and they've finished. I remember being near Grenoble one year and we had the most magnificent key for this room we were in. And I got all the way to the northern France and the key was still in my pocket. I thought, I'm uncomfortable in this car. And when I took it out and I realised I brought the key with me. So I asked her how she went on with keys, and she said, we sometimes get people to take them away, and sometimes they will send them back, and sometimes they won't, but we have spare keys, so it doesn't really matter. And that particular hotel, B&B, needed 3 keys, one for the outside room, one for the vestibule, and one for your room. So Treble Clef came about, because that was the idea, that was the seed for the idea of the story. And then everything else came together. One year when we were here, there was a games conference at the centre, and we would see all of these people walking around with tags carrying games and playing games in the hotel room, in restaurants, and I put 2 and 2 together and then started to work on that. And it just comes, I don't know where it comes from, but I can sit down and I can write, and some days I can spend 4 hours, 5 hours, and the time has just flown. And other days, I'll spend time reading through what I've written and then maybe only write another 1,000 words. I go away at Christmas for an extended period, and I will try and do 1,000 words when I'm away every day, which isn't easy because people come up and say, if they know you're a writer, what are you writing about today, or what is it, or can you tell me something about it? So it's best to write in your room and then come down.
Got it. No alcohol involved in the writing process?
No, not at all.
Not so caffeine?
It's a job.
It's a job.
No. It's a job. And I sit at the dining room table and I do my research there. I sometimes have 2 computers up. One will be for researching while I'm writing on the other. And I remember finishing one particular book and I'd just type the end. Now, it's something I never did, but when I was with a publisher, they always wrote the end on it. And I like to think that people will know it's the end by the way I've written it. But I put the end. And Debbie had a glass of red wine waiting for me. And I went to sit with her. And as I sat down on the settee, I said to her, do you mind if I just go back to the table? And the idea had come between leaving the table to the wine to write the next book. So I went back to the table and wrote the first 500 words of the next book within a matter of 10 minutes after finishing the other one.
Oh, it's almost as if the words are just floating around in the sky and you need to be there just to pick them out and put them down on
yeah, it's very strange. And for the book 9 that I'm writing now was a chance reading in the Telegraph. I read something that was quite fascinating. And I thought, there's a story there. There's a story. So I just made a note of it on my phone. And that will happen as well when I'm in bed. I'll wake up and I'll have a sentence in my head or something I wanted to write about, and I'll grab the notepad and I'll write it down. Because if I didn't put that down on paper, I know the next day it would be gone. I've learned that through experience. And you're trying to rack your brain. What did I think about? There was a really good word, or there was a good ending to a sentence, or a character trait I wanted to bring in, and it's gone. So if you carry a notepad, I have a notepad with me all the time. I've got my memo on my phone if I need to, and you learn as you go along. Experience tells you always be ready, because you never know when the next idea is going to pop up. It's no good sitting at the table and thinking, I'm going to write something today. That doesn't work. Once you have the idea, it works.
And do you need to walk around your particular location where you're setting the book to get that inspiration? Or sitting in a coffee shop in a Marconi's in Harrogate or a Costa or something? Are you listening for conversations? Are you sort of, in a way, snooping on what people are saying and then writing it down, thinking, oh, that's pretty funny, or that's pretty good?
Characters. I enjoy watching for people. I enjoy watching people. I'm a great watcher, and I will develop how they dress, how they walk. When I was on holiday, there was a gentleman who had 2 walking sticks. It was quite fascinating, and from my balcony I could see him every morning come to a certain sunbed, and he would put the walking sticks down, and then he was quite agile, and he would set the beds out for his wife and himself, and it was religious. Every detail was the same every day, and he's included in one of the books, and he knows.
Oh, he knows.
He knows, because I started to tell him that I was watching him after a couple of weeks, so he didn't change his habit, and he now reads all of my books, as does his wife.
Very good.
And I use his real name. Yeah, I'm going to use his name as well.
I'm hoping I won't feature in any of your books and I'm not murdered in any of them as well. Now, Malcolm, explain to my listeners how you go about getting a publisher. Because it seems to me that these days people more likely vanity publish, which I don't like that term, but they publish it themselves because they can do, and it's more democratic today as it should be. But you've had a publisher. Do you still work with the publisher? How did you get the publisher? Is it a big deal to have a publisher? Could you explain it all to us?
Yes, certainly. It was for me initially. I'd self-published, and I use that word, I self-published, engulfed after I'd written it. I did try to get to a publisher, and I had a number of rejection letters. They liked it, but not enough to publish it. And And so I thought, right, okay, I'll self-publish. And I went through a company called eBook Publishing, which is not a vanity publisher. You just pay them to format it for Kindle.
Forgive my term, vanity publishing. I confuse it with self-publishing. I don't know what the difference is.
It happens where people then find themselves with boxes of books in their garage forever and ever. But I wanted to put it out to see to toe in the water, really, see how it would be received. But I had the bug then to write, so it really didn't matter how it was received because I'd started writing something else. And I then, when I'd written the first one, which was Keen as Mustard, was the title, my working title of the first book, which turned out to be Only the Dead. Why it was called Only the Dead by the publisher, I don't know, because nobody died, but it was called Only the Dead. Mainly because all of the shells that came to be used in the story were from the First World War, and all of the dead from that, I don't know. I sent that to a few publishers and nothing. So I then wrote the second in the Bennett series, which was called Just Above Hades with the Brunswick Tunnel. And then the third one I sent it was really quite bizarre because there's an author called Angie Marsens who's been writing 4 years and has sold 3 million books. Millionaire now, I would assume. And I wrote to her, we'd communicated on social media, and I said to her, I'm thinking of giving up. I said, don't give up, just send her a couple more. And at that time, I looked on Amazon, and there was a lady called Liz Mistry who'd produced a book called Unquiet Souls, which was set in Bradford. So I thought, I'll read that and see if I recognise any of the places within Bradford itself. I then saw that it was published by Bloodhound Books, and I'd never heard of them. So I went online. They were open to submissions. So I put the third book into them, and within a fortnight I'd got a deal. And funnily enough, I was sitting at a friend's house in the garden looking after their dog, which is part husky. And the phone went, and it was them. And the dog was sitting with his head on my knee. And I couldn't believe it. And the dog looked at me, and I looked at the dog. And I tried to ring Debbie, and couldn't get an answer. And funnily enough, there's a little plaque in this garden, just where I was sitting, where it said, "This is the spot where Malcolm Hollingdrake," which I made as a joke for them, became a published author. And being a published author was important to me. And I don't know why. I just thought it gave your work some credibility. It made you real in some ways. I've consequently learned that that's not necessarily the case, because some of the best authors about are independent. Anyway, the upshot was the Bloodhound realised that I had 2 other books, so they said, can we make your 1-book deal into a 3-book deal? They then released the books in quick succession, November and December 2016. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Who's going to buy 3 books so quickly? But it worked. And I came back from holiday that Christmas, because strangely enough, they were released when I was away. So I had to do all my social media work at a silly time in the morning, because I was in the wrong part of the world. And but that was fine. That worked as well. So when I came back, they said, would you like to sign for a further 4 books?
The answer is, of course, yes.
The answer was, yeah, I'd love to. And I was thinking to myself, how am I going to write 4? I didn't think I could write 3 books. How am I going to write 4 more? But that happened, and then the Bloodhound said to me, we'd like to commission you for a new series. They wanted it set in Yorkshire, actually, with a female detective. And I said, yes, but I'd like to set it in Merseyside for research purposes, because I'm 17 miles from Merseyside, so it would have made life a little bit easier. But I could then contrast between Yorkshire and Lancashire. But that didn't work out. I finished book 8. And to be polite and professional to everybody, it was a good time to separate. And I left, and I was going to publish book 8, and Bloodhound said, would you like the rights to your books? Now that was something I didn't expect. So I said, yes, I would. So from that point, I decided to become an independent rather than write to another publisher. I wanted to be in control of what I was doing. And there's a lady called Louise Ross, who's a Northumberland writer, and she's self-published and an exceptionally successful lady, whom I know. And it was through thinking about her that I decided that I would give that a go. So I had to learn how to self-publish all of these books, take them back, re-edit, put new covers on them, keep the same titles because then I could keep all my reviews, but I wanted to have new covers. And serendipity, like Liz Mystery and like Angie Marsden's, came to play. I was on social media one evening and 3 photographs came on Twitter of smoke by a photographer from Lincolnshire. And I immediately thought, those are just what I need. So I contacted him and I asked him how much he would sell them to me with copyright. And within a fortnight I had all my book covers for the next 7, 8 books, should I wish. It was wonderful to deal with. Photo Links is their site, and he produced all the smoke scenes for me. And then I went to Craig Prince in Wigan, who I worked with Craig, who made sure the covers were perfect for Amazon. And so all the books then took on the same theme idea for the cover, all with the original titles, all re-edited and went back out. In paper and in ebook format.
And you explained to me earlier that on some one random day last week you sold about nearly 200 books in a day.
Yeah, a lot of them in America, which is lovely to think that people on the far side of the pond are reading, and Canada I sell to, and South Africa, France, Italy, and I just find that I've even sold to India, and I've not a lot, but I find that warming.
Surely Harrogate Tourist Board ought to be knocking on your door, beating your door down, in fact, to say, Malcolm, could you go around the world promoting Harrogate as a destination? You'd think. Have they been in touch?
They don't even want to put one of my posters up in their tourist office, strangely enough.
That is bizarre.
But a lovely story, again, serendipity, if I may.
Please.
I wrote a story called The Penultimate Man, a short story. My great uncle was killed on the 30th, he was 30 on the 26th of September 1918, at the age of 30. And last year I went to lay a wreath on his grave. And I was in Harrogate and I went into the tourist office at the bottom of the road. And I spoke to a young lady there called Ruth Egan. And I just explained to her that I was putting on a production of The Penultimate Man at the library with some singers and other authors to commemorate the centenary of the ending of the First World War. And would she promote it? They said they would promote that, where they won't promote specific books. And she said, my great uncle died in the First World War, and he's buried in Fleckyer Cemetery. And my great uncle is buried about a mile away. I know Fleckyer Cemetery very well. So I said to her, when did he die? And he died the day after my great uncle. And we just bumped into each other. So I said, well, look, I'm going out to lay a wreath. Would you like me to put a wreath on his grave as well? Well, she burst into tears. So I said, well, look, make something up. Here's my address. Post it to me. And I will go in and I will video putting it on his grave for you. Now, he was a Military Cross winner. He was a lot younger than my grandfather, my great uncle. And I sent it to her from the site. I actually sent it to her. And it was a beautiful day. The bells in the local church were ringing. The birds were singing. And it was perfect. It was a very typical First World War day, really. And when I came back, she thanked me profusely for putting this cross that she'd made on the grave. And then she said, well, I'm going out with my brother. I will go visit your great uncle too. And she did exactly the same for me. And since then, we've been friends. And in fact, the new book is dedicated to her and her mum and dad and the soldier in Fleckyer Cemetery.
What a lovely story. Which other Harrogate characters feature in your books?
A lot, believe it or believe it not. I try to include a lot of businesses and name the businesses as they are, and I get permission for that, which is really, really useful. I like to make it real, so the auction house will be mentioned. The Coach and Horses is famous for
Great
me.
pub.
And it's Cyril's favourite pub, because at that time there were no dogs, children, music, one-armed bandits. It was just good conversation, so he could go and hide himself away, because he lives in Robert Street. So you go down the Snicket, the Ginnell.
You would.
And it's as if that's his sanctuary down there, and it's separate from the rest of Harrogate for a while. So he can come across from his work over the Stray into the Coach and Horses and enjoy that. So I try to use as many local businesses, and in fact I've used the Mykonos restaurant in the latest one, and they've been fabulous. They've been absolutely fabulous. And it's important that I pick out then characters, and I won't name characters as such, other than I've just used Rudy, and people from Harrogate will remember Rudy, the Caribbean gentleman.
I remember
who
him.
used to sing and busk and bring a bit of sunshine to, I think it was Cambridge Road he used to on the corner, wasn't it?
I only met him once in a pub, the Devonshire pub, and it was memorable meeting him there. I can show you that.
It was. And he used to wear a duffel coat, and so he's mentioned. And I try to pick out poignant places. The Mercer Art Gallery, delightful. I left a body on the steps of the Mercer Art Gallery. They didn't mind. And I used the Hotel across.
The Swan.
The Swan. And I've used, there's the Studley just over the way.
It is.
So we've been in the gardens of the Studley, and it's just so real. It becomes real for me as well. And by using those places and using the Stray, then it's fine.
How do you deal with good and the bad reviews that you'll have on Amazon and other places? Do you respond to them? Are you allowed to respond to them? How does it work with reviews on Amazon?
Reviews, when I first started writing, it was like a dagger to the heart to get a bad review. But you become, reviews are good. Any review is good. I'm just happy if people put pen to paper or type in a review. And people have to think that they have to write a long script to say why they liked it, and they don't. They just have to say, really enjoyed it, loved the book, loved the story, original story, liked it, thank you very much. Or I didn't like it because, and that teaches me something. And I remember writing Hell's Gate, and in Hell's Gate it's important for the story that there's some dog fighting, and I learned a very valuable lesson, that within that story that human beings are torn apart, or two are, but the dog gets injured. And one reader particularly wrote to me and said, I'm sorry, but I got to the part where the dog was being hurt and I couldn't read anymore. The fact that 2 chapters beforehand that somebody had been torn to pieces didn't affect them whatsoever. And animals and harming animals within books, for me, will never happen now. I'm always very cautious as to how I deal with animals specifically within a storyline. The same with children. That's a definite cautionary path to tread. It has to be handled sometimes. It's important because it goes on. But I've done mine. I've written mine about child abuse, but I don't want to write another one because it's very hard. People think it's easy to write, but if I've written a particularly poignant part of a chapter, it takes it out of me.
Emotionally.
Mm. And actually, one particular day, I said to Debbie, I'm going to kill somebody off. Because I thought that was the end of the contract on the 4th book, and then I thought, well, that's going to be the 3rd one. I thought that's going to be the end, and I thought, well, I'm going to kill one of the police officers, and I was going to kill David Owen, and that's Cyril Bennett's sidekick. And David Owen is as popular, in fact, probably more popular than DCI Bennett from the reader's point of view. And Debbie turned to me and said, "If you kill him off, you kill the series, you know that." And I thought, she's right, you know. So I killed another officer, and the way that officer was killed, they were left at St Mary the Virgin Church in Ramsgill. Now, I don't know if you know, there are a couple of very, very beautiful gravestones in St Mary the Virgin, one of which is remember me as you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As you are now, so as I am now, so you will be. Prepare yourself to follow me.
Ooh.
And the body is propped up against this. And of course, Cyril feels as though he's let her down because she's been killed. And he was so close to finding her. So when he approaches and he reads this, it nearly destroys him as a policeman and as a person. So to bring him back from that was quite a challenge.
I bet. And now, which is your most reviewed book? Because I've seen one on Amazon which had, I think, 150 odd reviews, which blew my mind in terms of number.
152, I think, now for Only the Dead. That's been out the longest. But I've had... The trouble with Amazon is, of course, they take reviews away.
I didn't realise that.
You can look one day and you have Game Point reach the magic 100. So I put a message out saying, thanks very much indeed, get the magic 100. The day after, it was back down to 99.
Goodness.
So I thought, oh my goodness me, wait. And it still sits at 99, and you wait and you think, God, it's going to go to 100 one day. And it's always a difficult time because the newest review doesn't appear. You have to find a new review. So you go to the little box at the top and it says the latest review, and you click it, and you don't see it because it's just usually hidden, and you have to bring the page up. And your heart's a little bit in your mouth because you wonder, how many stars is it going to be? Majority of people, to be perfectly fair to them, will not review if it's going to be under 2 stars. A 3-star review out of 5 is considered a negative review on Amazon, according to Amazon. And I've had a number of 1-star reviews, and my heart sinks, and then I read it, best book I've read for ages, or fantastic read. And they've not fully understood the starring system. They think 1 is the best and 5 is the worst. So your heart sinks when you see 1 star and you think, oh my goodness me. And then you read it and you think, oh, that's okay. But it shows up as a bad review in the box. But there's a Facebook group now called 1-Star Review. And it's a private group for authors who actually post their worst 1-star reviews, and some of them are absolutely fantastic.
1 star.
1 star.
Well,
I'll take those all day, believe me.
I bet you will.
I'll take them all day.
So which book are you best known for out of the 10 that you've written, and there's some short stories? Is there one when, I'm thinking of Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code is what you would say, J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, maybe the first one or something. What would they say? Malcolm, Hollingdrake, think of?
The Harrogate crime series, they think of, and in fact, if you look at some of the reviews, Andrew, a lot of them now say the series gets better and better. And in some ways it should, because I'm learning as a writer all of the time. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Engulf back, because I think I made so many naive errors within that book that now, after I've redone it, I'm passionate about that book. I love it, and I can't wait. It's ready. I can't wait for it to come out. And in fact, there's a lady called Dee Grucock who was in the army. Her husband was in the army, and he suffered, I believe, from post-traumatic stress. And the book concentrates a lot on that, and it's her favourite book. And in fact, I've just given her the first paper copy, which is a non-for-sale one. It's the one you can order from Amazon, a draft copy, to check through how it looks. So I was up in Newcastle on Saturday to a writers and readers convention thing, and I gave her the copy, so she was thrilled. So the Harrogate crime series, I think people now know me for.
I bet. So Malcolm, your books are now available, I think, on Audible. So they're read out, so the listener is a listener rather than a reader. How does that process work, and how well is it working? It
works very, very well. And a lot of people prefer Audible, an audio book, to a standard book. I was very lucky when I heard that a company bought my first 4 books for Audible, and I had no say in who was going to read them. And an actor who's in Coronation Street and Emmerdale was the narrator for them, a gentleman called Nicholas Cam. who is absolutely perfect. I couldn't have wished for anybody better. And when you think that an audiobook is 8 hours long, so to keep the story going, to keep it right, to keep the sound, to keep the accents, to keep the characters, it's important to have the right narrator. Now in Hell's Gate, in one particular paragraph, I think there are 3 different accents. I think he nailed every one. And so when I came to actually self-publish an audiobook of Crossed Out, I contacted Nick immediately, who said, of course I will. He's from Lancashire actually, but he's got this lovely Yorkshire accent. I will do that. And it's been wonderful to work with, absolutely wonderful. And as I say, the nice thing about audiobooks is people can actually drive on holiday and listen as they go. As they can with podcasts, which indeed, is one of my favourite mediums indeed. Now, how many more years of writing, how many more books do you think you've got in you? I don't know. I think I'd like to write. I'd like to do the new series very much. So there's 3 books for that. So there's 2 books really left on that one because the idea for the first one is set. And I'd like to do probably 12 in the Harrogate crime series. Now to think that I could write, I've written 1 book in 7 weeks, but I've also written a book in just over a year. So I don't really know how long that will take me. As long as I'm enjoying it, and as long as it's fun, and as long as it doesn't take away too much of between Deb and myself, then I'll write every day if I can. But I know at my age that there isn't that much. There's more behind me than there is in front of me. So let's hope I can do a couple more Bennetts and a couple more on the other 2 in the series. And I'll be happy with that. And maybe kill Bennett off at the end? No. Ooh. He's worked too hard. He deserves to go to the coach every evening, doesn't he, and relax with his feet up. And isn't there a police rehabilitation unit in Harrogate as well? Well, there is. He's actually visited that when his partner was killed, so he was in there for that. So very good. Now, I understand that you attend and are instrumental in the Harrogate Noir events. I've not been. Tell my listeners all about them and tell me, please. Well, I've organised a couple now in Harrogate at the library. I bring fellow authors along. They will be interviewed on a panel and then they will read from their book. The nice thing is that the audience get to choose who reads when, so the authors don't know when their turn will be. So the worst is either going first or going last in anything, isn't it? So they don't know. And we will this year, this time on the 14th of September, we will be having a noir at the library here. We have some music, because I'm a great believer in music and stories work well together, because a song is only a short story, or it should be. And so we have a duo called the Hewers who are going to come over. Now, if you don't know what a hewer is... I don't. A hewer used to be... It's where the word hue and cry came from. A hewer used to stand on the coast and look out to sea, and when he saw the fish break the surface, he would call for the fishermen to launch their boats to go and catch. So they used to sit in like a stone hut, and that's where the title came from. And I like the link between hue and cry and the hewers. So they're coming over. We try to make them as professional as possible, so we have a really good sound system, which is usually Bose Professional, who have helped us in the past. And it's a good afternoon. And the nice thing is most noir events take place in bars at night. Now that precludes certain people who don't go to bars and don't want to go out at night, but would like to listen to authors speak and read. So this gives that opportunity for people from Harrogate to come along to the library, which is an absolutely magnificent library, to enjoy an afternoon of literary fun. But of course Harrogate's famous for its Theakston Crime Writing Festival every year, and you get the best crime writers from around the world, the most famous from around the world, on your doorstep. And they're the most welcoming and warm people. Lee Child, nicest man you could wish to meet. John Grisham, nicest person, just delightful. And when the festival is on, when you arrive at Harrogate Station, there's always
So a mark on the floor of where someone has died or purportedly had died.
The chalk mark.
The chalk mark, yes. Always a bit scary when you get off the train after a long day in Leeds working and to find someone may have died.
You never know you're going to bump into. So, funnily enough, if I may just tell you this little story, I was at the Hotel de Fan once having lunch with Debbie during the Crime Writers Week, and a gentleman came in. We were in the courtyard, and a gentleman came in and sat with a lady, and I thought, I recognise that man, but I can't think of his name. And we finished our meal, and I paid the bill, and we went out through the gate out. And I said to Debbie, look, Deb, I'm going to have to go back because it's just eating me away. I'm going to have to go in and see who that was. So I went across the table, and somebody else had joined them. So I said, excuse me, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I know your face, but I can't think of your name. And he stood up and he towered above me and he put his hand out and he said, Lee Child.
Oh.
And I thought, goodness me.
How embarrassing.
And I said, I'm Malcolm Hollingdrake and I write a crime series here. He said, good for you. But strangely enough, I've met him since then. But what you find is when you see their picture on the back of a book, it's usually very, very old.
I bet. Makes him look so good.
So to see him in real life, you know him when he stands up and he's dressed in his usual black and he wanders down Parliament Street. You recognise him, but you don't put two and two together until he said who he is.
Do authors get on with each other?
Fantastically.
Okay.
They help each other tremendously. They support it. Crime writers particularly. I have a number of friends now who write from all around the UK, and they're absolutely fabulous. Fabulous to go and meet. In fact, we have a dinner on the Saturday of the 20th at the Mykonos restaurant with 10 of us. I don't know what is the collective now for crime writers, but a murder. So there'll be a murder of crime writers in that restaurant on that evening, which will be lovely.
And you'll be with your moleskin notepads out and writing an idea down before someone else puts pen to paper, no doubt. Now, how do you find the names of your characters in your series?
I struggle. That is the one big difficulty I have.
Surely that's the easy bit, finding a name.
Well, it is, but then you read through your draft and you have 4 with the same Christian name, and you tend to write the same names that you're familiar with. So you might have quite a few Stuarts, or you'll have names that sound familiar, or surnames that sound familiar, and nothing confuses readers more than the names that are. They need to be separate. They need to be distinctive, and I've learned throughout that that's the hardest thing. So what I tend now to do, I ask people if I can use them. But I've also done competitions online where I say, does anybody want to be part of a novel? So they'll do the competition. If they win, and it's usually women who enter, I'll say, would you like to be good or bad? And 9 out of 10 times I say, I want to be the most evil person you can make me.
Wow, I'm surprised.
Really, staggering. And there was one lady called Monica Mack who won. I thought, what a great name.
It is a great name.
And she wants to be evil, so I made her an assassin. The sad news was that she died within the first 2 chapters. But I realised then she lives in Tasmania, in Australia. So... But then you get the other one, and there's another lady who's now a detective in mine called April Richmond, who lives in Ripon. And she said she'd like to be evil. I said, well, I don't have an evil character, but I could make you a detective. And the good news for that is she's been in 3 books. So it depends where you are. But I do use, my optician is in the latest one. Not that he knows.
He does now.
He does now. And you never know, Andrew. But I've had greys in my books before. In fact, the word grey, the name grey, was used to hide the real, because they use by the spelling grey and grey.
It's useful.
So you've been in, but not you.
Thank you. Now, Malcolm, it's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you. My first writer. I was a bit nervous actually interviewing you, I must say. You've been so open, inspirational, and name dropped so many places in Harrogate that I need to go and look up and read your series. Although I really struggle with crime books, I have to say, I really do. I like happiness. A lot of my job is misery as a lawyer, so I want happiness when I'm not doing my day job. So I maybe struggle then with the the crime stuff. But how do people find out more about you?
Just googling the name Malcolm Hollingdrake, HOLLINGDRAKE, a nice Yorkshire name, or authormalcolmhollingdrake.co.uk.com. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, just by popping that in.
And all over Amazon as well.
And all over Amazon, yes. And if you do read a book, do let me know, send me a review, good or bad. It's always nice to know what people do think. I can learn from bad ones, I can enjoy good ones.
And if you are going to give a 1-star review, just ensure that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Yes, and it says the best book I've ever read.
Indeed, I doubt there were many of those, and when I have looked, I didn't really see any. They were all pretty good. They were ranked incredibly high, and I wish I knew more about the series before interviewing you. I will go and look into them. Malcolm, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.